You know what you're listening to?
Is that a trick question?
It's the I Still Love This Game podcast with your host, Matthew Damian.
He's an idiot. Don't listen to this. He's an idiot.
Hello and welcome to episode 83 of the I Still Love This Game podcast. Now that is right, and you did not miss an episode, by the way. Last week's episode, the one with Houston White about the state of the NBA, I led in by saying that it was episode 81, but that was actually episode 82, so I got my numbers mixed up. But wow, we're up to 83, and that's less than a calendar year, so that's been a wild ride, because if you think back to it, the first episode was actually a preview for the last NBA season. So we're coming up to episode 100, and we'll do something for it. I'm not sure what yet. I might reach out to some prior guests. We may do a call-in show. That'll be fun. But what I'm thinking about potentially doing is reaching out to some ex-NBA players and see if they want to come on the show. So there's a bunch of options that we can do, but we'll definitely celebrate it. We didn't celebrate the 50th episode. I think that's because it was in the middle of the playoffs. That's when I was doing one episode a day. But now, obviously, I'm not doing that kind of workload. But we'll do something for the 100th episode. I'm not sure when that will be, because some weeks I do 2 episodes, some weeks I do 1. But it's coming up soon. And but yeah, as I said, we'll do something. And in the spirit of celebrating, we have another reason to celebrate, because we are finally concluding the greatest NBA draft hypothetical series. Now, this is a series that has already seen Kobe and LeBron teaming up in LA during their primes. We saw Bird, Barkley, and Jordan form the greatest trio of all time. We saw Carmelo win 3 rings in Detroit, along with the Big Three never happening in Boston due to Kevin Durant being drafted by Portland. Now, as I said a second ago, last episode, we saw Bird being drafted by the Bulls and how it led into Barkley and Jordan also being picked up by the Bulls. And not just that episode was one of my favorites that I've ever done, not just simply because it showed the different trajectory for those three, but how it affected the likes of Magic Johnson, Dr. J, Moses Malone, Bernard King, etc. And that was a huge episode, just not only when you look at the names and players involved, but I have absolutely no regrets at placing it number 2 behind this episode. So without further ado, here it is, the 1984 draft. And this should be no surprise. And very little context needs to be applied here. The 1984 draft is considered by most to be the best draft in NBA history. And everybody, well, when I say everybody, I'm not talking about nerds on NBA 2K or Fortnite. I mean anybody with a drop of credibility. They will at least rank the 1984 draft as a top 3 draft of all time. Now, it's obvious as to who's going to be featured here. It's Jordan. And as we all know, the Rockets took an all-time top 10 player in Hakeem, or Akeem as he was referred to back then with no H. So there isn't a whole lot of second-guessing towards Houston. Instead, the Blazers squandered the chance to draft Jordan with the 2nd pick of the draft. But instead, they took an injury-plagued Sam Bowie ahead of the greatest player of all time. Now, I know Portland wanted a big man, and I hate to Monday morning quarterback this, but why? Just why? Bowie couldn't even stay healthy in college, so what made them think that he would be able to deal with the demands of an NBA schedule? Was there any thought given there? And I also scoff at the notion that they quote-unquote needed a big man. How many players were drafted either 1 or 2 in previous drafts, from Isaiah Thomas to Mark Aguirre? They weren't centers. So why was Portland so obsessed in drafting a center? Or is it possible that they grossly underrated Jordan, and they felt that Drexler was better than Jordan, at least at this point? And then when that line of thinking was proven dramatically wrong, they started the spin of, well, we needed a center. Whatever. But in the midst of all of this, is it possible we're letting another team off the hook here? Yes, Portland could have drafted Jordan, and the only other team drafting ahead of Chicago outside of Portland was, of course, Houston. and Olajuwon's career was good enough to justify him going number one, even with Jordan's legacy. But what if they could have had both? And yes, I said that. What if they could have actually had both? Ironically, it was Olajuwon who let the cat out of the bag with this insane what if, when in his book, he said that Portland offered Drexler and the number 2 pick for Ralph Sampson. Now, it should be noted that the only person to have mentioned this is in fact Hakeem Olajuwon, so it's far from being confirmed. But man, it's so full of so many twists that I just could not resist. And when you combine the fact that Olajuwon, Jordan, and Drexler were all around the same age, this was an easy choice for the greatest draft hypothetical in NBA history. So enough of the rambling, and let's get right into it. With the number 1 pick, the Rockets still take Hakeem. The Blazers then trade the number 2 pick and Drexler to Houston for Ralph Sampson. The Rockets then draft Jordan with the second selection. The Bulls are now picking third, and they're in a tough spot. Do they go with Sam Bowie despite the injury concerns? Or what about Barkley, who is talented but has huge questions regarding his attitude? The Bulls select Sir Charles, and suddenly the 84 draft has the most talented players selected in the top 3 out of any draft. Dallas then jumps at the prospect of Bowie and takes him at number 4. And Philly then selects Sam Perkins at number 5. The rest of the draft plays out just like in reality. The Rockets are loaded with talent, and they have a former championship-winning coach in Bill Fitch. But Houston is a difficult proposition for anyone to coach, especially an old-school coach like Fitch. How can you find enough shots to go around for Drexler, Olajuwon, and Jordan? Now, all 3 are coachable, but all 3 consider themselves to be the guy. It's great on paper, but can we really buy into the concept that Drexler would be satisfied being the 3rd option? And whose team is it? Is it Olajuwon or is it Jordan's? One guy will have to be the primary weapon. The other guy would have to be, for lack of a better term, a supplementary / role player, at least on offense. The Rockets show glimpses of greatness, but they're inconsistent as they win 45 games. But that's still good enough for the 3rd in the West. The Bulls, however, with Barkley, they hit rock bottom. And Charles Barkley is considered a major bust without the guidance of Dr. J and Moses Malone. Portland, with a healthy Sampson, do very well, and they are the 4th seed in the West. Houston draws Utah, who had drafted Stockton but not yet Malone, and he wasn't getting major minutes anyway. The Rockets took care of them, and then Denver in the 2nd round, to advance to the conference finals to play the Lakers. This is an absolute a dream matchup. I couldn't resist that one. With Olajuwon and Kareem versus Kareem. You've also got Jordan versus Magic and Drexler versus Worthy. The Lakers had a wealth of experience. They had already won 2 titles in the decade, but their dominance in the conference is being questioned. Unfortunately for the Rockets, questions about their star players' roles play a big part in this series, as the Lakers' toughness under Pat Riley exposes their weaknesses and their immaturity. The Lakers win in 5, but the league is put on notice regarding the Rockets' young trio and what they are capable of. The Lakers meet the Celtics in the finals, where Boston will prevail in an explosive series that further solidifies the NBA as a sport that's rising in popularity. In the off-season, the Rockets receive numerous offers for all of their young studs. Dr. J is offered for Jordan, as is Bernard King. Isaiah Thomas is offered for Olajuwon. The Celtics offer former Finals MVP Cedric Maxwell for Clyde Drexler. The Rockets management doesn't panic though, and still view the 84 season as very much a success. The challenge for Houston is finding the right pieces to surround their trio. And they draft Terry Porter at the end of the 1st round to back up John Lucas. They also deal Rodney McRae, who is clearly the odd man out, to Seattle for Jack Sikma. Now, for those of you who don't know, in Seattle, Sikma was a 7-time All-Star, along with being an NBA champion with the Sonics in 1979. But he was traded to Milwaukee in 1985 after beginning to decline. The Rockets would immediately slot him in at center and push Hakeem out to the 4 position, with Jordan and Drexler on the wings, and Lucas still starting at point guard. On paper, this looked like a great lineup, But Olajuwon's speed was not as much of an advantage when going up against opposing power forwards, and the slowdown on offense was beginning to cause frustration for their thoroughbred athletes of Olajuwon, Jordan, and Drexler. In the playoffs, the Rockets would meet the Lakers again, and the conservative approach for the Rockets hindered them significantly, as Magic and the Showtime Lakers punished the Rockets, dispatching them in 5. This obviously means that the Lakers would play the vaunted 86 Celtics in the finals, as opposed to the Rockets, who shocked them in reality with Sampson's buzzer beater that rolled around the rim for seemingly 20 seconds. The 86 finals, although not featuring any of the players directly involved with Jordan and Drexler coming over to the Rockets, was everything that the league could have asked for. In 85, the Lakers had gotten sweet revenge on Boston for not just the 84 championship, but decades of domination. But this year was the Celtics' turn for redemption. The Celtics had added Bill Walton and moved Larry Bird to the small forward to allow Mikhail room to operate on the post. And the backcourt of Ainge and DJ was more than complimentary. The Lakers looked tired against the Rockets and vulnerable. And many people ask, had the Lakers advanced in reality, how would they have fared against the Celtics? The answer is not good. The Lakers got one of the most legendary performances from a top 5 player in league history from Kareem in the 85 finals. But as I mentioned before, the Celtics now had Walton to go with Parrish to slow him down. The Lakers would have been crushed in that series, and that's exactly how it goes in this hypothetical, as Boston wins in 5 games. The offseason sees Houston fire Bill Fitch after what many people viewed as regression on the first year with Olajuwon and Jordan. They offered Drexler straight up for Barkley, who was struggling in Chicago. And with the Bulls drafting Charles Oakley, Barkley is now considered the expendable one. Chicago, in their infinite wisdom, decided to decline the trade for Clyde Drexler, and instead they accept Bernard King, who is coming off a torn Achilles, for Barkley. Now it's Barkley and Ewing, not Barkley and Oakley, that are the inside presence for the Knicks. The Rockets now, they appear to be an absolute mess. They're without a coach, one of their stars is upset over nearly being traded, and their roster is flawed. They bring in Lenny Wilkins for a couple of reasons. Number one, he's won a championship, although that didn't help much with Bill Fitch. And number two, he has history with Sigma. Wilkins, though, realizes that Sigma's best days are behind him and trades him to the Clippers for Cornbread Maxwell, who was traded there the season prior for Bill Walton. Cedric Maxwell is not a great rebounder, which is the critical area of concern for the Rockets, but the former Finals MVP's game fits much better with the Rockets as it pushes Olajuwon back to the center position, where he was creating a lot more mismatches and damage. Wilkins also gives Terry Porter a lot more minutes, splitting time with Lucas at point guard. The results are immediate, and the Rockets are neck and neck with the Lakers for the top record in the league. Jordan is putting up MVP-type numbers with 30 points per game, which is an incredible 7 points per game lower than what he did in real life at this point. But unlike the situation he found himself in Chicago, he has some genuine help, and he can put so much more work in defensively. Along with Olajuwon, they look to be the best defensive duo of all time, and neither of them are 25 years old yet. Drexler is not a forgotten man in this, and is very effective on both the open court and half-court situations. By mid-season, Porter has replaced Lucas as a starter, and the results with him pushing the ball are incredible. The Rockets team finishes just 3 games back of the Lakers with a franchise-best 62 wins. But if there was ever an epitome of a team that nobody wanted to play in the playoffs, it's this version of the Rockets. They sweep the 7th-seeded Sonics, who are led by Xavier McDaniel. And then they face off against the Blazers, who are led by, of course, Ralph Sampson. This was Sampson's last significant season, but he was no match for his old team, as the Rockets eliminated them in 5 games. The Lakers, on the other hand, they have their hands full with a young Stockton and Malone duo and barely escape in 7 games. And now we have our showdown. The first time the Lakers and the Rockets met, it was met with such excitement. Last year's wasn't so much, as the Rockets were looking closer to implosion than genuine contention. But this time they're firing on all cylinders. The Lakers, despite their struggles with Utah, have just come off 62 wins, and Magic Johnson was named MVP. Jordan was runner-up in MVP voting, and many people felt he was more deserving. Jordan and Magic, despite very different play styles, are essentially a wash. Worthy versus Drexler is an advantage for the Lakers, but Olajuwon creates so many issues for the Lakers defense. We all saw what Stockton and Malone did to the Lakers. Now imagine what Jordan and Olajuwon would do. As good as Magic Johnson was, he was a mediocre on-ball defender, and he was a liability with quicker players. And Kareem, especially at this stage of his career, was a weakness in pick-and-roll situations. Now line them up against complete and athletic freaks such as Jordan and Olajuwon, and Jesus, the Lakers get demolished in 6 games, and that's being generous to them. Out in the East, the defending champion Celtics reloaded with the addition of Len Bias, and in this hypothetical, he doesn't pass away in the off-season. That being said, he doesn't give the immediate impact that Kevin Durant did when he joined Golden State either. Regardless, the Celtics are a lot deeper and they're better with him. And that's saying something considering how good they were in 1986. The decline of Walton allows KC Jones to experiment with a much smaller lineup. And he moves McHale to the center, Bird goes back to the power forward position, which is where he really started his career, Len Bias is at the 3, and the backcourt remains the same with Danny Ainge and Dennis Johnson. The East is much more competitive this season, though, with the bad boy Pistons starting to emerge, along with Barkley and Ewing dominating inside for the Knicks. And Cleveland, they're also playing very sound basketball. The Celtics and Pistons would face off in the conference finals, and the Pistons would throw everything at Boston. There would be no turnover by Isaiah Thomas at the end of Game 5, but the Celtics were better with Bias, so they wouldn't need that strike of lightning moment. Detroit would go down in 7 games, but the rest of the league would also be put on notice as to what to expect from the Pistons in years to come. And now, 1 year later than when it happened in real life, we have the Rockets and Celtics in the NBA Finals. There are, of course, very different rosters involved though, with Bolton no longer playing a role and Lenny Bias being alive. And of course you have Jordan and Drexler being on the Rockets without Ralph Sampson. Now we all know what Jordan did to Dennis Johnson in the playoffs in 1986, where he dropped 63 points. But that was hardly a fluke. In fact, the game prior, he scored 48 points on them. And that was when Dennis Johnson was a year younger. And Jordan was coming off missing over 60 games due to his broken foot. How do we think this will work out for Boston, considering that they couldn't double team or triple team Jordan to dare Dave Corzine to hurt them? If they doubled Jordan on this Rockets team, with Drexler and Olajuwon and Porter and Maxwell, how do you think that will play out? And beyond that, how will they actually slow down Olajuwon when the ball is in Olajuwon's hands? This Celtics team has a much better chance than the Lakers with an old Kareem in slowing down Hakeem. But regardless, Olajuwon is going to get his. The Celtics do have Bird, who is still dominating the league. But the Rockets have his old running mate, Cornbird Maxwell, willing to accept that challenge and match wits with Larry Legend. The matchups are as follows. Parrish goes up against Olajuwon. Cornbread is up against Kevin McHale. Larry Bird versus Jordan. Clyde Drexler and Terry Porter up against Len Bias and Dennis Johnson. This is as close on paper as it comes, with 8, assuming Len Bias doesn't pass away, Hall of Fame players squaring off. The other 2, you've got a former Finals MVP in Cornbread Maxwell and an all-star player in Terry Porter. So they have game 2. Every game is competitive, but at the end of each contest, the Celtics have Larry Bird, who was as much of an assassin as he was surgical. He knew exactly where to be and when to be in those moments. The Rockets do have Jordan, and they do have Olajuwon, but they weren't quite the killer in those situations as Bird was, at least not at this point in their careers. And that is the difference in this series, as the Celtics claim their 4th championship in 7 games. The loss leaves the Rockets questioning as to what they need to do to win a title. They found a style that works. They got Hakeem and Jordan and Drexler all playing at a high level. They convincingly beat the Lakers. They played well in the finals, and yet they still lost. In the offseason, once again, they are looking to upgrade their power forward position. And after offering Drexler for Barkley and being turned down, the Rockets and Bulls engage in trade talks once again. This time a deal is done, as Maxwell and Lucas plus 2 future first-round picks are traded to Chicago for Charles Oakley. The Rockets seem set, but they aren't the only team in the West making a move. The Lakers are convinced that Byron Scott can't help them contain Jordan, and the young Lakers scoring stud is on the trading block. They trade him for an old but still very effective Moses Malone. And now the Lakers have 5 Hall of Fame players in their starting lineup. Kareem, Moses Malone, James Worthy, Michael Cooper, Magic Johnson. But the question is, do they have the speed to keep up with those young Rockets? These two square up once again for a 4th straight year, but this time the Rockets have home court. The Lakers put Kareem on Oakley, which was not an option the year prior because Maxwell was far too quick and far too versatile of a scorer. This leaves Moses Malone on Hakeem Olajuwon, but once again this is hardly an answer at this stage of his career. But despite dominating the glass all season long, the Rockets have no weak rebounders either. There are no advantages for the Lakers, and the Rockets win in 5 games, and Pat Riley resigns following the loss. In the East, Kevin McHale breaks his foot but plays through the pain to help the Celtics get back to the finals. But despite this being a repeat in matchups of last year's finals, the result couldn't be any further apart. As you may remember, the Celtics won in 7. So the furthest thing apart you can get from that is the Rockets sweeping. And that's exactly what they do. They sweep the Lakers to claim their very first NBA championship. Now, after taking down the 2 most successful franchises in such emphatic fashion, and in only their 4th season together, the Rockets' win sends shockwaves throughout the entire league. How can any team genuinely compete with Olajuwon, Oakley, Drexler, Porter, Jordan, all in their primes? All kinds of insane rumors start flying around. Will Magic Johnson return to Michigan and play for the Pistons? Will Larry Bird retire, which is something he's hinted at for a while because of his bad back? The Lakers bring in Rick Pitino to coach them, but with a roster full of NBA legends and championships, they underestimate the transition process for their young coach. It's a complete disaster. And with Riley now coaching Ewing and whipping Barkley into shape for the New York Knicks, there is constant talk that Magic will end up on the Knicks. What is not expected is a trade that's made in the offseason, Gerald Wilkins to the Cavs, that would make such a difference. You see, with Chicago rebuilding, they weren't so desperate to search for talent in such remote places, such as Central Arkansas, to complement Michael Jordan. With that in mind, they never moved up in the draft. And it was the Cavs that ended up drafting a Mr. Scottie Pippen. But the thing is, the Cavs didn't know what to do with him. The Knicks, though, with Riley's coaching, Pippen would become the ultimate complement to Ewing and Barkley in the front court. The Western Conference completely reshapes when the Lakers trade Magic Johnson and Moses Malone for David Robinson. And a lot of you might be thinking, whoa, really? A Magic Johnson for a rookie? Well, David Robinson had so much hype when he entered the league. And he didn't even enter the league for 2 years. And I'll get to that in a minute. But David Robinson was considered the crown jewel and somebody that could redefine not just the center position, but all of basketball. And Magic Johnson, despite being one of the greats, a lot of teams wouldn't have surprised the basketball world had that trade gone down. With Riley gone and Magic now traded, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar retires temporarily, only to be lured out of retirement by the Pistons to complete their own monster lineup. Larry Bird, of course, he returns to Boston, and McHale is healthy again. So while the Rockets are now the standard, there are plenty of teams nipping at their heels. Houston is surging around Christmas when the Knicks pull the trigger on trading Barkley and 3 first-round picks to San Antonio for Magic. So despite the fact that there is a perception that the Rockets are untouchable, there are plenty of teams making moves to challenge Houston now. The only team that really fell off and conceded was the Lakers. But the interesting thing about this is even though they got the draft rights to David Robinson, he was serving the US Navy. And essentially, only James Worthy was left, and they sunk to the bottom. But this also means they'll be able to rebuild relatively quickly via the draft. And in a couple of years, they'll be able to get David Robinson. So the future is still relatively bright for the Lakers competing in the next 5 or 6 years. But for the time being, with the Lakers no longer being relevant, the only team capable of challenging the Rockets is Utah. But with Olajuwon and Jordan outplaying Stockton and Malone, and the depth of the Rockets being far superior to Utah, the Jazz don't stand a chance. The East playoff picture is much more entertaining. The Celtics have such an interesting dynamic, with a mix of veterans that are beginning to decline, along with ascending star power of Lenny Byers. The Knicks have Magic, Ewing, and a very young and raw Scottie Pippen. The Pistons have depth galore with Isaiah, Dumas, Rodman, Aguirre, Lambeer, Kareem, and of course Vinny Microwave Johnson. The Knicks and Pistons meet in the second round, and it's Detroit's depth and mind games towards Pippen that puts them over the edge. In the conference finals, Detroit finally conquers the Celtics as Dennis Johnson and Bird are unable to counter the Pistons' energy on defense. And we finally get to see Jordan and the Pistons go at it. This time, however, it's Jordan that's being chased by the Pistons and not the other way around. The Pistons try to rough up the Rockets, but that tactic doesn't get them anywhere against Jordan or Oakley or Hakeem Olajuwon. This is not a young Horace Grant or Scottie Pippen. The other tactic that is rendered useless is the Jordan rules, which was essentially a zone defense on MJ, and that is countered by the amount of offensive weapons that the Rockets have. The Pistons have defense, but the Rockets have defense too, and they have scoring, and they have rebounding, and they have championship experience. And the Rockets win the series in 5. And it is such a bitter pill to swallow for Detroit, as they've gone through hell just to make the finals. And when they do, they run into what looks like to be a brick wall. Their journey was a dead end. And speaking of dead ends, that's where we finish up the podcast for today. That was the 5th season. And you might be thinking, well, that might be a boring hypothetical, because what's going to happen? What, are the Rockets going to win 9, 10 straight titles? It's possible. But you know what else is possible? Egos. How long before Drexler starts to get a bit annoyed before the adulation that Jordan gets? How long before Jordan starts to hear the rumors that he's just like Kobe did, that he can only win alongside Olajuwon and he wants a team for himself? All these things play into the factors. And once again, as I said, all the way along, I am writing a book about hypotheticals. And in the book, it will be for the entire career of the said player. So it'll be for Jordan. And you only get the first 5 seasons in the podcast, but you get the entire career in the book. The book is not complete yet. It might be a little while before it comes out, because I'm not just doing draft hypotheticals. There's also trade hypotheticals, injury hypotheticals, you name it. Think of the biggest hypotheticals in NBA history, and they are going to be covered in that book. Anyway, guys, some football's about to start, so I'm going to go check that out. But I thank you guys for joining us. Speaking of joining us, on the Facebook group, not the Facebook page. If you're on the Facebook page, go to the group, which is linked, or request access to join the group. Next Friday, this coming Friday, I should say, we're going to be doing a watch party of the 1984 NBA Finals, Game 4 of the 1984 Finals. So that should be some fun. We'll see if that's actually worth exploring in the future, but we'll test it out. And if you could join us, that'll be great. If not, have a great rest of your weekend, and I will see you next time.